Coming up on New Day at Arirang. South Korea's top representative to the UN on Wednesday called on North Korea to stop its provocations and engage in dialogue. The remarks came at a UN General Assembly meeting in New York to discuss the recent failure of the UN Security Council to pass a resolution regarding North Korea. South Korea, the United States, and Japan agreed on Wednesday to bolster their cooperation against North Korea's threats. In a joint statement, Vice Foreign Minister Choi Dong and his American and Japanese counterparts strongly condemned Pyongyang's behavior as unlawful acts. The OECD lowered its economic outlook for South Korea to 2.7% from 3.0%. The downgraded projections come as the world's economy's outlook was lowered to 3% from its previous 4.5% from last December.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Thursday, June 9th, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Oh Young.
And I'm Yoon Jae. Thanks for joining us this morning because over the next hour, we'll be giving you a look at some of the biggest headlines of the day and experts' insights on key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. Our top story this morning, while addressing diplomats at the United Nations, South Korea's UN ambassador called for North Korea to stop its provocations and return to the negotiating table.
This comes as the North's UN envoy defended the regime's right to self-defense. Kim Yo-sun with our top story.
The two Koreas came head-to-head over the issue of sanctioning the North over its latest missile provocations. Seoul's top representative to the UN on Wednesday called on Pyongyang to halt provocative activities and engage in dialogue.
We urge the DPRK to stop such provocative actions, abide by all relevant Security Council resolutions, and respond to the call for dialogue and peace on the Korean Peninsula through complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization.
The remarks were made in a UN General Assembly meeting to discuss the latest failure of the UNSC to pass a resolution on North Korea. During the same meeting, North Korea's UN ambassador defended the regime's development of ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons to protect it against, quote, direct threats posed by the U.S.
If DPRK conducted test constitutes the threat to the international community, UN Security Council should clarify convincingly why ICBM test by United States, hostile to us, is not regarded as threat to the DPRK.
This comes as China and Russia defended their vetoes of a resolution calling for tough new sanctions on Pyongyang. The close allies reiterated their opposition to increased sanctions, blaming Washington for heightening tensions on the Korean Peninsula. They also urged the U.S. to suspend its joint military operations in the region. Beijing and Moscow also insisted that it's high time for dialogue between North Korea and the Biden administration. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
The United States has once again warned that it will react with a robust response if North Korea decides to conduct its 7th nuclear test. Speaking to reporters on Wednesday, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that Washington is closely monitoring the situation. This comes as the U.S. Deputy Ambassador to the UN says that the Biden administration is seeking dialogue with the regime without preconditions. He told diplomats at the UN that using private channels, the U.S. has conveyed this message to senior North Korean officials. Vice Minister-level diplomats of Seoul, Washington and Tokyo held talks on Wednesday to address regional and global challenges. They jointly condemned Pyongyang's repeated military provocations and pledged stronger cooperation on security. Kim Da-mi has more.
South Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Cho Hyun-dong, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, and their Japanese counterpart Takeo Mori have reaffirmed the three countries' shared goal of North Korea's complete denuclearization, as well as their cooperation on security and peace in the region. The three sides held their 10th regular vice ministerial meeting in Seoul on Wednesday, which marked the first time it's been held in South Korea in 5 years.
While there's speculation about further provocations from the North, such as 7th nuclear test, and its nuclear weapons and missiles becoming a substantive threat, The three sides shared an understanding about the importance of close South Korea-US-Japan cooperation and agreed to strengthen security cooperation.
In a joint statement, the three officials strongly condemned Pyongyang's continuous and unlawful missile launches, and the U.S. further reaffirmed its commitment to the regional defense of South Korea and Japan, including through extended deterrence, while leaving the door for dialogue open.
The United States, the Republic of Korea, and Japan are fully and closely aligned on the DPRK. Our shared goal remains achieving the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Wednesday's trilateral meeting also covered regional issues and global challenges, including their joint efforts to support Ukraine, get Myanmar back on the path to democracy, and promote a free and open Indo-Pacific. In fact, Japan's Takeo Mori made note of their discussions about China's activities in the East China Sea and the South China Sea.
The regional situation that was discussed, frankly, included the situation in the East China Sea and the South China Sea. We shared the recognition that such a unilateral change of the status quo by force is not allowed in the Indo-Pacific, especially in East Asia.
The three countries further agreed to closely communicate on stabilizing supply chains and to boost their cooperation on economic security and new technologies. The next such meeting will take place in Japan this fall. 김다미, Arirang News.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on Wednesday presided over a key Workers' Party meeting. According to the North state-run Korean Central News Agency on Thursday, North Korea is holding its fifth plenary meeting of the party's 8th Central Committee. The meeting began on Wednesday and is expected to continue on Thursday. The KCNA did not go into details of what was discussed in the meeting, other than that the Central Committee is conducting a review of state policies and members are deciding on a series of important issues.
Now, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's special envoy to the European Union, Kim Ki-hyun, is in Belgium, home to the EU headquarters, to deliver a handwritten letter from the president. According to an interview with Yonhap News Agency on Wednesday, Kim said that the letter contains Yoon's hopes to strengthen ties with the EU as a strategic cooperative partner of shared values. He added that the EU and South Korea share similar values like free democracy, human rights, and constitutionalism, and that Korea would like to create a stronger connection on the basis of these values rather than being a simple trade or military partner. The letter will soon be delivered to European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen and European Council Chief Charles Michel. South Korea will provide $1.2 million to help support the safe operation of Ukraine's nuclear power plant. The decision was made at the IAEA Board of Governors meeting. The fund made through the IAEA will be used to ensure the safety of nuclear facilities in Ukraine and for resources needed to manage radioactive waste and implement safety measures. This is part of Seoul's efforts to provide humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Now, President Yoon responded to criticisms that the top office appears to favor candidates who served as prosecutors. The South Korean leader cited the U.S. system, where it's common for government attorneys to make inroads into politics. Yoon Jung-min provides a deeper analysis.
미국 같은 나라 보면은 그런 그 거버먼트 어토니 경험을 가진 사람들이 정관계에 아주 폭넓게 진출하고 있습니다. 그게 법치국가 아니겠습니까?
That's President Yoon Suk-yeol's defense when asked about the latest controversy over the new South Korean leader's personnel appointment, leaning too heavily on those with prosecutorial background. This follows a little over a dozen posts being filled with former prosecutors so far, either for his cabinet, government posts, or presidential secretaries, with former prosecutor Lee Bok-hyun becoming the latest to be chosen as the chief of the nation's financial supervisory service. Key U.S. officials do seem to own some experience in the legal field, although not long for some cases when compared to President Yoon's pick for his officials, many of whom are longtime prosecutors. U.S. Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines, for instance, started her career as the legal officer at the Hague Conference on Private International Law over 2 decades ago, after which she worked at the State Department's Legal Advisor Office. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas had previously worked as an assistant attorney, during which he has prosecuted white-collar crimes like tax evasion and money laundering prior to joining the Biden cabinet. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is in fact also an attorney by training, having earned his Juris Doctor degree in 1979. The right kind of expertise and work experience for the right positions. That's been the stance of the presidential office when it comes to personnel appointments. But with controversy still running high on whether Yoon's appointments have been too heavy on those with prosecutorial backgrounds, it remains to be seen how the president will continue to fill his key posts. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into key issues in the spotlight right now. With a delegation from the ruling People Power Party visiting Ukraine and Ukraine's Deputy Foreign Minister Dmytro Senik in Seoul, all eyes are on how South Korea plans to assist Ukraine further in the prolonged Ukraine-Russia conflict.
And to get a look at what kind of discussions are being held and how Seoul can further assist the Eastern European nation, we connect with Song Se-ryun, Professor at Kyung University Law School. Very good morning to you, Professor. Well, first off, with Ukraine's Deputy Foreign Minister Dmytro Senik visiting Seoul, what do you think is the motive behind his visit?
Well, obviously, as Ukraine is at war with Russia, they have been making efforts to secure necessary arms and other support. He came to Korea to first thank for the support so far, because we've been providing some support, but continue to request for the arms so that they can use it immediately at the battlefield. However, there is also a sense that the war is hopefully at the waning stage, so hopefully the restoration and rebuilding will be a key issue soon. Korea has already expressed willingness to be engaged in that effort. So the discussion seems to be broad. Not only the deputy minister will be meeting with the governmental offices, but he'll be also meeting with private sector engaged in development, collaboration, and trade, rebuilding, and so on and so forth. So it's a multi-purpose. I think that there are sovereign states, companies helping out Ukraine, but for Korea, having already provided the humanitarian support, I think the more key issue is to be in collaboration and in step with key allies and friends. So I think that there will be maybe an announcement about what kind of support we can upgrade to, or whether we can be of more help to Ukraine in many different areas.
Professor Song, the ruling People Power Party Chairman Lee Jun-suk and his delegation, of course, making that trip to Ukraine as well, which, by the way, included that meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. What do you suppose some of the things that the two sides have discussed there?
Well, this was not billed as a presidential envoy or anything, so it's apparently a visit by leaders of the ruling party and also lawmakers. So the discussion could be broad, and by meeting with President Zelensky, they did talk about broad matters. But however, I don't suppose that they can promise anything because they don't represent the government. But I think that the meeting served the purpose to show that the ruling party leaders are being abreast of the key global affairs, and the interest and also mutual dialogue is going to be pretty helpful going forward. However, I have to point out that because of the timing, and also because they cannot really promise anything, the meetings are not really urgent or compelling. So that's why there are speculations as to what the real purpose of the meeting is. What is it for? The domestic consumption, and they're having some bickerings and posturing among the party leaders simply because there are some party leadership competition going forward. So we'll see whether this is a jigsaw puzzle that should be more clear going forward.
And Professor, during the previous Moon administrations, Seoul refused to provide Ukraine with any lethal weapons. And well, Ukraine continues to make requests for assistance of that kind. And how do you think the current administration is going to respond to that request?
Well, I think the policy formally has not changed yet, but the government is considering whether the armed support should take place. I think that is pretty apparent that they're mulling over it. Korea, as I said, is already committed to the post-war restoration efforts already. But President Yoon will be attending the NATO summit at the end of the month. And Korea is contemplating whether we should send the message of upgrading our support. So if that happens, probably the arms support of the weapons could be in the issue. Simply because there have been repeated requests from the Ukraine for arms support, but because other nations, key ally nations, are stepping up in their effort, and if the war could be ending soon with the critical support at this juncture, probably Korea would be mindful of that and be willing to be in lockstep with other key allies, for example, U.S. and European countries.
So, I mean, we've been seeing the U.S. Really pledging to continue support for Ukraine, but how do you suppose South Korea will continue assisting Ukraine moving forward, I guess?
Well, it's multifaceted. So other than the arms support that they immediately need, there are some humanitarian needs. Korea will be setting up our aid office in Ukraine soon, and collaboration as to what happens after the war, all those rebuilding and the collaboration and help they would need probably will be more important as time goes on. So I think that Korea will be continue to be involved, and the immediate question as to whether they will include armed support would be decided pretty soon. But regardless of that decision, I think that Korea will be involved, not only on the government sector, but from the private sector as well.
All right, Professor, unfortunately, it is all the time that we have for today. But again, thank you very much for your insights. And again, looking forward to speaking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And with that, that's going to wrap up the first hour or first half of New Day at Arirang.
But we do have more coming your way in the second half, including Global Insight, to discuss whether South Korea and Japan can really mend their ties and move forward despite long-standing historical issues. So do stick around. We'll be back in just a moment.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean New Day. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
넌 볼 수 없고 가질 수 없어 뚝뚝 뭘 쏟아내도 뜨거운 자태 한번 비추지 않고 내게만 가치란 그녀는 유명한 화이 서울의 별다 어딨나 in your eye 걔와 함께면 넌 디스토피아 내 발걸음 따라오면 유토피아 나의 나
I feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun.
And welcome back to the second half of New Day at Arirang. The OECD's World Economic Outlook, including South Korea, has been lowered from its previous expectations, taking into account the war in Ukraine.
Inflation is also expected to stay, but will likely subside next year. Kim Do-yeon with the details.
OECD's lowered South Korea's economic outlook to 2.7% from 3.0%. According to its projection report on Wednesday, South Korea's consumption is set to strengthen but will be impeded by high inflation. OECD also warns that a possible shortage of rare gases usually sourced from Russia and Ukraine could weaken South Korea's semiconductor exports. It also added that the country's monetary policy should aim to keep inflation expectations anchored. Other countries also saw their projections mostly lowered. In fact, the world economy's projection was lowered to 3% from its previous 4.5% from last December. This is because that projection came before Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February.
And let me start by saying that we're all paying the price of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. First and foremost, Ukrainians, obviously. But the war is also a big shock to the world economy. It will drag growth down, and it is pushing inflation higher.
Inflation is set to stay for a little longer, according to the OECD, with the peak to come at 8.5% this year in OECD countries before slipping to 6.0% next year. For South Korea, the rate was raised to 4.8%. This is more than a double of what was expected before. It's also the highest since 1998 during the Asian financial crisis. The rate is expected to go below 4% next year. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The monkeypox outbreak has now topped 1,000 cases outside African countries where the disease is endemic. This is according to the WHO on Wednesday, with Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus saying the risk of monkeypox becoming established in non-endemic countries is real. Cases have now been found in 29 countries where the virus does not typically spread. Brazil is also awaiting test results to confirm its first case of monkeypox. Health officials said the patient, a man in his 40s, had recently traveled to Spain and Portugal. Now, South Korea's first homegrown space rocket, Nuri, will lift off for a second time next Wednesday following final checkups over the weekend. That's according to the Korea Aerospace Research Institute, which has been focusing much of its efforts on upgrading the three-stage rocket. Nuri's engines burned out earlier than expected despite reaching its target altitude of 700 kilometers during its first launch in October of last year. Nuri will soar into the skies from the Naro Space Center in Gohung, Jeollanam-do Province with its payload of satellites, one 180-kilometer performance verification satellite and 4 mini-cube satellites.
It's now time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. The mood is growing for better Seoul-Tokyo relations, which hit their lowest point in recent decades when long-standing historical disputes degenerated into a trade and diplomatic conflict between the two neighbours. But with a new government in Seoul and a new leader in Japan as well as of last year, the relationship has started to mend again, beginning with efforts to resume regular talks on areas of shared security interests. South Korea's new Yoon administration has appointed foreign policy experts, including Foreign Minister Park Jin, who studied in Japan, and Yoon Dong-min as a Japan specialist as the pick for ambassador to Tokyo. So we discuss where Seoul-Tokyo ties are headed with these recent developments, and for this I'm joined by Lee Min-jung, Professor of International Relations at Gwangju National University, and Yoshihide Soeya, Professor Emeritus of Keio University. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us. And, well, my first question to you, Professor Im. Now, South Korea has named a new ambassador to Japan, Yoon Dong-min, and of course he's a Japan specialist, as we know. And, well, what do we really know about Mr. Yoon, and how do you think he's going to handle relations with Japan?
Well, Dr. Yoon is a graduate from actually Soya Sensei's University, Keio University. He earned his doctoral degree from the Keio University, and he's a true academic. He has been a professor, and he was the head of the Korean National Diplomatic Academy for several years during the Park Geun-hye administration. So he has been known as, again, more true academic. Again, the expert of course, Japan, and then general security issues as well. So I feel like, of course, his predecessor, the Ambassador Kang Chang-il, when he was appointed as the ambassador to Japan, there were kind of expectations, of course, because he is more very familiar politician to the Japanese inner circle as well. But as long as the relationship between the Tokyo and Seoul was chilled that much, even the pretty powerful, influential politician like Ambassador Kang, there were not that many options, even for, again, the Mr. Kang. So this time, I feel like, of course, the mood is changing, and Professor Yoon, again, the new ambassador, can be a good messenger between the Tokyo, Seoul, and Tokyo.
Professor Hwee, I wonder what you make of this, the recent developments that we've seen, this reignition of South Korea-Japan ties. How is the Yoon government being perceived in Japan right now by the Kishida government?
I think those people who are watching the relationship for the past years, I think essentially welcome the coming of President Yoon as the top leader of South Korea. And I think chemistry between Japanese Prime Minister Kishida and President Yoon should be good, I think at the fundamental level. And so I think conditions are there for us to begin to think a new start of the relationship.
And Professor Hwee, would you see the appointment of the new ambassador, Mr. Yoon, as a positive step towards that front?
Yes, of course. Well, in fact, he's been a long-term good friend of mine since his graduate days at Keio, my alma mater. And of course, he's not only Japan specialist. I mean, he's been watching North Korea, Korean Peninsula, and issues beyond. So he's not Japan specific, specialist. I think which is very good for the relationship, because the relationship between us should grow much bigger. I mean, not limited to the bilateral relationship, nor just Northeast Asian context. But I think our relationship should go beyond. In fact, region-wide and globally. And from that point of view as well, I think Ambassador Yoon should play a great role.
Right, so we can really see...
sorry. Yes, okay.
Right, we can see them really cementing that very firm foundation to really advance in Seoul-Tokyo relations. And Professor Lim, now, as key US allies, how do you see South Korea and Japan working together in terms of security, which has, of course, been the top issue, especially nowadays with North Korea and its provocations?
Well, again, the cooperation between Seoul and Tokyo should have been much more than the current level, because North Korea's as we see, specifically this year, their oldest missile tests, their provocations, the level is simply very outrageous. It's just beyond any past. So having had that kind of real immediate, urgent challenges, threats from the North. Again, the South Korea alone, of course, we do have a very modernized, very capable military, but, we alone, we cannot just have enough deterrence capacity, or again, our capacity might not be really enough, again, to face all these, outrageous challenges. So partnership, of course, ROC-US alliance is the most important, but not only just ROC-US alliance, we need more partners and friends, like-minded countries who can support our security. So definitely Japan is the closest neighbor, and we do share many important values, even though we do have, of course, many difficult issues, such as, again, the historical issues. But as long as we are neighbors, and as long as we share the similar value, I think more cooperation should have been made. But now I don't want to think it's too late. Definitely, I think we can, again, how would you say, strengthen the already existing partnership between the two.
And same question goes to you, Professor Sawyer. How can Seoul and Tokyo really strengthen their cooperation in handling the threat from North Korea, such as, deepening their military intelligence sharing, for instance, and also the previous Moon government wasn't very receptive to Japan seeking, really addressing the issue of its adopted nationals in North Korea. But do you think the Yoon government will be more receptive to that?
Well, the answer is definitely yes. And I think in our relationship, there are both, of course, problems and common interests and shared interests. And I tend to look at the structure of this as an issue of giving priorities. Which do you prioritize? And I think previous administrations in both Seoul and Tokyo, have tended to prioritize problems, history issues first, and so that's, I think, the reason why we could not go much deeper into actual cooperation. And I think the order of priority should be very different under the current administrations in both, again, Seoul and Tokyo. So I think that's a very good thing, overall. And so common interests, shared issues, of course, include first and foremost the North Korean problem. And as I said previously, our common interests should go beyond. And as I was looking at U.S. show prior to this dialogue, and South Korean deeper engagement in Ukraine, and also NATO and EU, I think that's a very good thing for the current Yoon Suk-yeol government. And of course, as you know, Japan has also been very active. And so there is room of cooperation and collaboration between our countries, regarding those global issues as well. And so prioritizing history, on top of before all these common interests, I think is a wrong thing to do for both governments. But the good sign is that's not the situation today between Seoul and Tokyo.
Right, so rather than prioritizing problems, as you said, really focusing on the challenges that are very imminent and facing them directly. And Professor Im, now, what is the probability of President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida meeting at the NATO summit this month? I mean, if they do, what agendas do you think they're going to really prioritize?
Well, I think the probability, if you ask me the probability, I would say, it's pretty reasonably high, or it can be likely, because, NATO, of course, some critics will say that, again, the NATO's expansion was really provocating the Russia, and it was one good reason for the current, again, the Russia-Ukraine war. But again, of course, there are that kind of critical voices as well. But NATO has been actually evolving. Its function has been evolving, and as I mentioned earlier, Korea needs actually more partner, because if you think about all the stalemate situation in this region, in East Asia, again, China actually should have done more more actually to deal with the all this North Korean issues. So of course, China will be criticizing U.S. and they'll be criticizing even us. But again, the China is actually the most influential country, which has the largest leverage vis-a-vis the North. But as long as we have all this kind of stalemate situations here in this region, again, we want to break through. We want to break through all the stalemate situations, which means again that we need more partner. So in that sense, again, the NATO can be all these European countries who have like-minded countries in Europe. They can be, I think, good partners to deal with all this, difficult issue. So not only just, those military threat, economically too, all this, global supply chain really faces a huge challenge. All this, some will say that, this block, making a block and the separate regions is a kind of threat to the global economy. One sense, that's true, but at the same time, again, we also need to be flexible and resilient with all this, changing trends. So definitely, again, the European countries, again, I think Korea need more, again, the more cooperation with the European countries too. So having said that, again, the Korea-Japan, beyond just bilateral issues, again, we need to think about more comprehensive general agenda together with the European partner as well. I can agree more with Soya Sensei's earlier comments about the prospect of the Korea-Japan relations.
So at this point, it looks like South Korea and Japan share more commonalities than differences. And in most cases, they're speaking with one voice, especially on very important global issues. And well, Professor Soya, now, the fact of the matter is, though, that there still are very steep historical differences between the two countries. Sure. And well, in terms of dealing with them, are they manageable? Like, how should such issues be pursued by the two governments?
Well, having said what all I did, that doesn't mean that our problems are not important. Yeah, they are important. And so it's a matter of prioritizing, as I said. But the prioritizing would mean that, even though we prioritize working together on global, regional, and other issues, but simultaneously we have to continue to talk about and negotiate about these problems. And one biggest flaw in the previous period was there was no diplomacy functioning. I mean, diplomacy was defunct, almost non-existent over these issues. So the first thing to do is to establish some channel, to begin to talk and negotiate over these issues and put everything on the table and have frank discussions. And doing that, of course, is not easy on both sides because these issues are perhaps first and foremost domestic problems. I mean, there is a deep domestic division, chasm between different camps. And so managing this issue is, I think, first and foremost, is a domestic problem. And so bilateral relationship has been suffering from, this structural sort of unfortunate reality. But in order to overcome this, I mean, unless two sides talk, you cannot deal with domestic, context. And so therefore, if this is a matter of prioritizing, I mean, you should prioritize bilateral talks, diplomatic, contact, and then dealing with domestic context from that point of view.
Right. So we have seen that the matter of bilateral ties, it's been strongly political on both sides for many years, and hopefully we'll see some real, very genuine, frank diplomacy bridge over those political differences. And Professor Soya, before we go now, Prime Minister Kishida, he has some key events coming up, the upper house elections this year. And do you think he's going to be able to focus on improving Seoul-Tokyo ties ahead of that? Or do you think we're going to see more progress after next month?
Well, Kishida has been moving very carefully towards the upper house election. And because it's a matter of domestic politics, first and foremost, before going to national elections. And so he has been compromising his beliefs in the complex domestic context. I think that's what we are seeing. And so I think many people should agree that upcoming upper house elections should be the critical turning point. And unless Kishida begins to do something different, than what he has been doing now, I think things would not be that promising. But I think he is now maneuvering through domestic difficult processes, and that's why some of his actions may look as though it's giving in to some conservative pressures, but I think from his point of view, it's a compromise. So prior to the election, I think it's not easy to expect some breakthrough moves coming from him. So the important stage should be after the elections.
Well, it seems that the roadmap is pretty clear. The two neighbours are going to have to really build and strengthen their relations. And Rob, I'm afraid this is where we have to end the interview today due to time, but that was Lee Moon-jung, Professor of International Relations at Gwangju National University, and Yoshihide Soeya, Professor Emeritus of Keio University. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Song Hye, host of the program National Singing Contest for over 3 decades, has passed away at the age of 95. Now, the South Korean entertainment industry legend continued working until the very end. President Yoon posthumously awarded Song the highest honor award to individuals who contributed to the culture and art sector. Our Shin Yeon sheds light on his life.
South Korea's beloved television presenter, Song Hye, has died aged 95. Police and medical staff said Song passed away at his home on Wednesday. Local media outlets had reported of Song's recent deteriorating health and that he was hospitalized in January. From 1988, Song was the host of popular Korean TV program National Singing Contest, also known as Korea Sings. Last month, the Guinness World Records listed him as the world's oldest TV music contest host. The show aired every Sunday, earning Song the nickname Sunday Man. Over the course of his 34-year spell on the show, Song greeted over 10 million contestants. Born in 1927 in Hwanghae-do province, which is now part of North Korea, Song crossed the inter-Korean border to Busan during the Korean War. He began his career in his 20s as a singer in the Changgong Orchestra. He has also worked as a comedian, actor, and radio DJ. Well loved by the public, Song has a road named after him in Seoul's Chongno-gu district, and in 2021 was the subject of a documentary film. Song Hye repeatedly said that his mission was to spread joy until the day he died.
정말 감사는 안 드릴 수가 없는데, 그러니까 평생 언제까지 또 여러분과 만날지 모르겠습니다만은 그 결론이 날 때까지 저는 안 갑니다. 꼭 여러분들 붙들고 같이 가겠습니다.
He did just that. Song Hye will remain a legend of Korean television. Shin Yeon, Arirang News.
Now, kids' cafes are booming here in South Korea. The number of these indoor playgrounds has grown nearly 4 times over the past 11 years. And now Seoul has opened its very first public kids' cafe, which is much more affordable than the private ones. Our Song Yoo-jin went there to find out more.
Kids' cafes might conjure up an image of kids sitting to have something to eat or drink, but in South Korea, they are actually indoor playgrounds for children. And there are over 300 of them in the capital, Seoul. But this one is different. This is Seoul's first city-run kids' cafe. Located in the Chongno-gu district, this facility is for kids aged from 3 to 7. There are 3 play areas, one where children can draw, play with colorful yarn, or have fun with fabric. One with a giant trampoline, while another is full of books and board games. Instructors and security personnel are on site to ensure safety. The cost of all this is only 2,000 Korean won, which is around $1.60 for a child and adult. The average entry fee for private kids cafes is almost 8 times higher. The cafe opened late last month, but it is already fully booked until the end of next month.
Most kids' cafes only have rides, so we always had to wait, take turns. I was also worried about accidents, but here it's nice that kids can just run around and play with the toys freely.
Experts say more should be built.
Public kids' cafes are a new form of highly accessible indoor playground. Creating more of them is one of the few effective ways to bring up South Korea's low birth rate.
But private kids' cafes are voicing concerns over the survival of their businesses.
We're not demanding the city to stop building public kids' cafes. We at least hope the city will hand out vouchers that citizens can use at private kids' cafes. They could also operate only on weekdays, as the city created these venues to provide a daycare service.
The city has promised to work closely with the private sector.
To prevent competition with private kids' cafes, all users can stay in the cafe for maximum 2 hours. Also, we are not selling any food or beverages. We'll keep on communicating with the owners for our coexistence.
The city plans to open 20 public kids cafes by the end of this year. The second and third ones will open in the Chunglang-gu and Dongjakgu districts in July. 송유진, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Iran on Wednesday disconnected International Atomic Energy Agency cameras tasked with monitoring the country's nuclear sites. The move came hours before the UN nuclear watchdog adopted a resolution criticizing the country for a lack of cooperation. The IAEA had expressed concerns about traces of enriched uranium found at 3 sites Tehran had not declared as hosting nuclear activities. Diplomatic sources noted that the IAEA censure, the first to criticize Iran since June 2020, was approved by 30 countries and has officially been adopted, with only Russia and China voting against it. The US, the UK, France and Germany have all urged Iran to, quote, cooperate with the IAEA. On Wednesday, Belgium's King Philippe reaffirmed his deepest regrets for his country's exploitation, racism and acts of violence during its colonization of what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Philippe also offered a traditional mask of the Suku people as an, quote, indefinite loan. The mask has been held for decades by Belgium's Royal Museum for Central Africa. Congo President Félix Tshisekedi and many politicians have enthusiastically welcomed Philippe's 6-day visit, with large numbers of ruling party supporters waving Belgian flags. But many Congolese were disappointed by the absence of a formal apology for Belgium's colonial atrocities. Back to Iran, where at least 22 people have been killed and more than 50 were injured in a train crash in the eastern part of the country on Wednesday. According to officials, roughly 350 people were on board the overnight train from the city of Tabas to Yazd, with reports saying the train struck an excavator, which caused nearly half of its cars to derail. Images following the crash suggest carriages were snagged by the excavator. However, authorities have not yet explained what caused the crash. This latest tragedy to hit the country follows the collapse of a 10-story commercial building, which killed 41 people last month. A car plowed into a crowd of people in the German capital Berlin on Wednesday, killing a teacher and injuring several others, including 14 students. Berlin's fire department said that 6 people sustained life-threatening injuries and 3 others were seriously hurt. The driver, a 29-year-old German-Armenian national, reportedly drove into pedestrians on a sidewalk near Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church at around 10:30 a.m. before crashing into a shop window 1 block away. He has been detained and is receiving treatment in hospital. Investigators are trying to determine whether the attack was deliberate. India's Road Transport Ministry set a Guinness World Record on Wednesday for constructing a 75-kilometer-long highway in just 5 days. This beats the previous 2019 record held by Qatar for a 25-kilometer-long stretch of road that took 10 days to complete. Starting on June 3rd in the western state of Maharashtra, the construction of the single-lane highway was completed on June 7th in a record 105 hours and 33 minutes. Approximately 1,300 workers were tasked with the building of the road. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good morning. Those of us in the capital region, parts of Gangwon-do and Chungcheong-pukdo province will need an umbrella on the way out. Well, a sprinkle of rain started a couple of hours ago in Seoul and will pick up as the morning goes on. And expect to see about 5 to 20 millimeters of rainfall. Then sudden rain is in the forecast this afternoon in central inland regions. So the further south you are, it's very likely you'll have a rain-free day under sunshine with very strong UV rays. Well, rain will keep things cool again with temperatures in a similar range to yesterday in the capital area before a major warm-up moves in tomorrow, and it's going to stay hot through the weekend. Morning temperatures are 2 to 3 degrees higher than the same time yesterday. Sunny skies to start the day in southern parts of the country. In fact, daytime highs will also be 3 to 4 degrees higher over in south. So Daegu and Gwangju will be topping out at 27 degrees Celsius this afternoon. And decent air quality is expected nationwide all day today. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up our newscast for this hour, but we'll be back tomorrow for our Friday's edition of Nida Arirang.
Thanks as always for tuning in, but stick around for more updates throughout the day. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and as always, take care.